The sleet came sideways, needles of ice slicing through Clara's jacket and soaking the boxes in her arms. 6 extra-large pizzas. The smell of garlic and grease clung to her hair, her sleeves, the bag across her shoulder. Her fingers had gone numb 3 blocks ago. The lobby of the glass tower glowed gold against the charcoal sky. She pushed through the revolving door and left a trail of water across marble so polished she could see her reflection, pale, tired, 24 years old, and drowning. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor took 37 seconds, she counted. When the doors opened, phones were ringing. Voices clawed over each other. Someone shouted Paris, and someone else swore. Clara stepped into the chaos, pizzas balanced against her hip, and immediately spotted the man in the navy suit, Julian Thorne. She knew his type before he opened his mouth. He checked his watch, checked it again. His jaw tightened. "You're 17 minutes late." Clara set the boxes on the reception desk. Her hands left wet prints on the cardboard. "The bridge was—" "I don't care about the bridge." Julian's voice dropped, the kind of quiet that cut deeper than shouting. "We have a multi-million-dollar crisis happening in that room, and you show up smelling like a deep fryer with soggy pizza because you can't figure out how to leave early." The receptionist looked away. Clara felt the heat crawl up her neck, but she kept her face still. She'd learned that trick years ago, how to absorb cruelty without flinching, how to let insults slide off like rain. "I need a receipt for the receipt," she said. Julian snatched the pen, scrawled his name without looking at her. "Next time, use your pizza brain to plan ahead." He walked away. The glass door to the conference room swung shut behind him, and Clara could see shapes moving inside. Suits, screens, panic. She folded the receipt and tucked it into her pocket, but something made her pause. Through the glass wall, she could see a massive monitor. A man's face filled the screen, silver hair, sharp cheekbones, an expression carved from stone. He was speaking, and even from here, even through the glass, Clara could read his lips. French. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory. "Ma chérie, French is not just words, it is how you see the soul." Clara's hand found the doorframe. She should leave. She should disappear back into the storm, back to the pizzeria, back to a life that never noticed her. But the man on the screen was angry, and the people in the room had no idea why. The conference room smelled like espresso and desperation. Eleanor Voss sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She was 55 and formidable, a woman who had built Voss and Sterling from nothing, who could negotiate a merger in 3 languages and close a deal with a handshake. But right now, her eyes held something Clara had never seen in powerful people. Fear. On the monitor, Henri Beaumont waited. His office in Paris was all dark wood and oil paintings, a world away from the glass and steel desperation of Jersey City. He glanced at something off-screen, then back at the camera. His mouth thinned. Julian stood beside Eleanor, his phone open to a translation app. The screen glowed between them like a talisman that had already failed. "Monsieur Beaumont," Julian began, reading from the app's garbled suggestion, "we have la compréhension of your—" he squinted, "préoccupations?" Beaumont's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Distaste, or maybe pity. "Vous me manquez de respect," Beaumont said. His voice was soft, controlled, laced with venom. Julian tapped frantically at his phone. The app spat out, "You miss me of respect." "We don't," Julian started. "Je parle de dignité." Beaumont leaned forward. "Votre entreprise ne comprend même pas ce que signifie mon nom." "Your business does not even understand what my name means," the app translated. Eleanor's breath hitched. Julian, what is he saying? He's upset about dignity and his name? Beaumont's hand moved, and suddenly a document filled half the screen. French legal text, dense and formal. He tapped a section with one manicured finger. Article 7, force majeure. Vous avez traduit cela comme clause de faiblesse. Julian's phone buzzed. You translated this as weakness clause. The color drained from Julian's face. His hand moved to loosen his tie, then stopped, as if even that small gesture might betray how badly he'd miscalculated. Around the table, 3 other associates sat frozen, their laptops open to documents that had suddenly become irrelevant. That's a legal term, Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. Force majeure means unforeseeable circumstances, acts of God. If he thinks we called it a weakness clause, we didn't just insult him, we implied his entire family business is built on fragility. Vous m'insultez, Beaumont said, his voice dropping to something colder than the sleet outside. Vous insultez la famille. Vous insultez 150 years of legacy. The app translated, you insult me, you insult my family, you insult 150 years of legacy. Eleanor stood. Monsieur Beaumont, please, this is a misunderstanding. We have the utmost respect. But Beaumont was already reaching for something off-screen. His hand hovered, and Clara knew what came next. He would end the call. The deal would collapse. Voss and Sterling would spend the next 6 months trying to salvage a reputation that would already be in ruins. Outside the glass walls, the storm had intensified. Sleet hammered against the windows in waves. The city below had disappeared into gray. Clara's fingers tightened on the doorframe. She could taste copper in her mouth. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to stay invisible, to let the powerful people handle their powerful problems, to remember her place. But her grandmother's hands had been covered in flour and silk thread, and those hands had taught her that language was a bridge, that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. Clara stepped into the room. The movement caught Eleanor's eye. She turned, irritation flashing across her face. Not now! Il ne s'agit pas d'argent. Clara's voice cut through the room, clear and steady and flawless. Il s'agit de l'honneur de votre grand-père. The room went silent. Beaumont's hand froze. Eleanor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Julian stared at Clara like she had materialized from another dimension, this girl with pizza grease on her sleeve and rain in her hair, speaking French like she had been born in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower. What happened next left the entire room speechless. Subscribe to see how a pizza delivery girl changed everything. Clara had learned French from a woman who had lost everything and rebuilt it with thread and stubbornness. Her grandmother, Odette, had arrived in New Jersey in 1962 with $50 and a suitcase full of fabric samples. She'd worked in a Bayonne textile factory until her hands bled, saved every penny, and eventually opened a tiny alterations shop that smelled like lavender and lemon oil. On Sunday mornings, she would sit with Clara at the kitchen table and teach her the language of her childhood. Not textbook French, but the living, breathing dialect of Lyon's Silk District, where words carried the weight of centuries. Now, standing in a conference room 43 floors above the Hudson, Clara let that language rise to the surface. Monsieur Beaumont, she said, meeting his gaze through the screen, permettez-moi de clarifier l'intention de mes collègues. Allow me to clarify my colleague's intention. Beaumont leaned back in his chair. His eyes narrowed, studying her. Et qui êtes-vous? And who are you? Clara Vance. Je suis... She hesitated, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Je livre des pizzas, ordinairement, mais ma grand-mère m'a appris que la langue est un pont, et parfois les ponts doivent être réparés. I deliver pizzas usually, but my grandmother taught me that language is a bridge, and sometimes bridges must be repaired. A ghost of something crossed Beaumont's face. Curiosity, perhaps, or respect. Eleanor found her voice. "Clara, I don't understand." "Sit her down," Beaumont said in English, so crisp it could have cut glass. Then, switching back to French, "Mademoiselle Voss, expliquez-moi ce désastre." Eleanor's hand shot out, pointing to the empty chair beside Julian. Clara moved toward it, her wet shoes squeaking against the polished floor. She sat. The leather was cold through her jeans. The translation app made it seem like you were calling force majeure a weakness. In French legal terminology, force majeure is sacred. It protects both parties from catastrophe, but the app translated it as if you were suggesting his family's contract was built on fragility. Eleanor's face went pale. Oh, God. Clara turned back to the screen. "Monsieur Beaumont, the error was technological, not intentional. Voss and Sterling understands the weight of your family's legacy. They are asking for your partnership precisely because of that legacy." Beaumont steepled his fingers. "Continue." And so she did. For the next 40 minutes, Clara became something she had never been before. Necessary. She translated meaning, not words. When Eleanor spoke about market expansion, Clara explained it in terms of heritage preservation. When Julian tried to interject with financial projections, Clara gently redirected, explaining to Eleanor that in French business culture, you speak to the soul of the enterprise before you speak to the spreadsheet. Beaumont tested her. He used idioms from Lyon, obscure references to the silk trade that only someone raised in that world would recognize. At one point, he mentioned a specific type of fabric pattern, à la tire, and asked if she knew what it meant. Clara smiled. "It's a weaving technique. My grandmother told me about it. The pattern requires absolute precision because even one mistake ruins the entire bolt. She said it was like life. You can't go backward to fix what's already woven." Beaumont went still. Then he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. "Your grandmother was very wise." Clara met each test with ease, her grandmother's voice guiding her through the labyrinth of subtext and tradition. "You speak like someone who has touched the old fabrics," Beaumont said, switching back to French. "My grandmother worked the looms," Clara replied, "before she came to America." Eleanor listened, truly listened. She stopped interrupting, stopped trying to control the narrative, and simply let Clara guide the negotiation through the cultural minefields that had nearly destroyed it. She pulled out a leather notebook and began taking notes, her pen moving quickly across the page. Every few minutes she would glance at Clara with something that looked like wonder. Julian, meanwhile, had gone silent. His phone lay dark on the table. His authority, built on credentials and connections and expensive suits, had collapsed without a sound. He was watching Clara with something between shock and resentment, as if she had broken some unspoken rule simply by being competent. Once he tried to interject with a comment about quarterly projections, and Eleanor cut him off with a single raised hand. The deal began to stabilize. Beaumont's shoulders relaxed. He asked questions about distribution timelines, about partnerships, about the American market. Clara translated each one, adding context, smoothing rough edges, building the bridge her grandmother had taught her to build. But then Beaumont went quiet. He looked at Clara for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Mademoiselle Voss, vous me rappelez quelqu'un?" "You remind me of someone." Clara's breath caught. "There is a question I must ask you, and your answer will determine whether we proceed." Eleanor leaned forward. "What question?" Beaumont smiled, but his eyes stayed on Clara. "Where did your grandmother learn the silk trade? Which atelier?" The room held its breath. Beaumont asked one final question that would reveal everything about Clara's past. You won't believe what he discovered. Subscribe now. Clara's hands had gone cold again. "My grandmother," she said slowly. Learned in Lyon, Rue de la Platière. Beaumont's expression cracked, just for a second, a flicker of recognition that traveled across his face like lightning. Then he leaned back, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavier. Odette, he said. Odette Vance, mais Moreau. Clara's heart stopped. Eleanor glanced between them. I don't understand. How do you— Odette Moreau worked for my grandfather, Beaumont said, still in French, still looking only at Clara. She was 15 years old when she started. She had hands like a surgeon and an eye for color that he claimed was unmatched in all of Lyon. He used to say she could feel the quality of silk in the dark. Clara's throat tightened. She never told me she worked for a Beaumont. She left in 1961, Beaumont continued. My grandfather was devastated. He tried to convince her to stay, offered her twice the salary, but she said America was calling. He never found another seamstress like her. He paused. I grew up hearing stories about the girl who could mend a tear so perfectly you would swear the fabric had never been broken. The silence stretched. Eleanor stared at Clara as if seeing her for the first time. Julian had gone perfectly still. Beaumont's eyes softened. Destin, he murmured. Destiny. The granddaughter of Odette Moreau walking into this room at the exact moment my family's partnership was collapsing, carrying her gift for mending what is broken. He switched to English then, his accent impeccable, his tone sharp. I speak English perfectly. I have for 40 years. This entire call, I have understood every word. Eleanor's face went white. Julian looked like he might be sick. I do not do business with people who cannot respect my language, who think an app can replace understanding, who see efficiency as more valuable than dignity. His gaze moved to Julian. You failed my test before you began. Julian opened his mouth, closed it. His hands trembled slightly. Beaumont turned back to Eleanor. But Mademoiselle Vance did not fail. She stepped forward when she had every reason to stay silent. She honored the bridge her grandmother built, and in doing so, she honored my family. He leaned forward. I will sign this contract, but I have one condition. Eleanor straightened. Anything. Mademoiselle Vance will be your liaison for this partnership. All communications with l'Empire des Neiges will go through her. She will be compensated appropriately, given a title that reflects her value, and treated with the respect she has earned. He looked at Clara. Acceptable? Clara couldn't speak. She managed a nod. Eleanor turned to her, and Clara saw something crumble behind the woman's eyes, the realization that her systems had failed, that her filters and algorithms and credential requirements had nearly cost her everything. I'm sorry, Eleanor said quietly. I should have seen you. Julian stood abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor. Without a word, he walked out of the conference room, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Beaumont smiled. I believe we can proceed now. The deal was saved, but Clara's life was about to change forever. Subscribe to see her ultimate transformation. 6 months later, Clara stepped out of a black car in front of a building she had only seen in photographs. Paris stretched around her, all iron balconies and slate roofs and light that made everything look like a painting. She wore a tailored charcoal coat, her hair pulled back, her hands free of flour and grease. The title on her business card read European Acquisitions Liaison, but the words still felt like they belonged to someone else. Eleanor was inside the building, negotiating the next phase of the partnership. Clara had 3 hours before the meeting began. She took the train to Lyon. The city her grandmother had left behind was smaller than she'd imagined, older. built on hills overlooking rivers and red roofs. Clara walked the Rue de la Platière, her fingers brushing stone walls. She found the building where Odette had worked, now a boutique hotel, renovated and gleaming, but the bones were the same. She stood there smelling coffee and bread, feeling the weight of everything her grandmother had carried across the ocean. Odette had built a bridge with nothing but language and love. She had taught Clara that dignity didn't come from titles or credentials or corner offices. It came from knowing your worth and refusing to forget it, even when the world insisted you were invisible. She thought about Julian's voice calling her clueless, about absorbing that cruelty like it was deserved. She thought about the moment she stepped into that conference room, her heart hammering, her grandmother's words rising to her lips. Recognition didn't arrive because she demanded it. It arrived because she held on to her dignity long enough for someone to notice it truly mattered. Clara turned from the old building and walked back toward the station. Paris was waiting, the next deal, the next bridge to build. She smiled. The girl who delivered pizzas in the rain was gone, but the woman who replaced her carried something more valuable than any title. She carried her grandmother's legacy, and that, Clara had learned, was a bridge that could never be burned.